Hey, before we get to today's great episode, wanted to let you know of a new exciting thing going on for the Lounge. For the first time since we started this podcast, the Lounge has entered into a partnership with a company that is aligned in how we think. Completely stop gambling. So Betttr is giving away 200 free subscriptions for life to the first 200 users from this podcast. Download Betttr, find the link in the show notes, or searching Betttr in your app store. So it's Betttr, BETTR, quit gambling. Search for that on the App Store or click into the link in the podcast show notes. So I'll see you on Betttr. And now to today's episode. Welcome into the Gambling Recovery Lounge. My name is Eric, and I'm a compulsive gambler in recovery. The date of my last bet was June 15th, 2021. It is good to be back in the lounge with everybody. This is experience number 12. Been away for about a month. Very busy month of October, which is good, but we're back, and we have a great interview tonight that I'm really excited about. My brother and friend in recovery, Zach, is joining us tonight. So Zach, welcome into the lounge. How you doing, man?
Doing great. Really happy to be here with you, Eric. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you. All right, so Zach, we're going to do what we do with each guest. We're going to start with the icebreaker topic. So what is your recovery song?
So my recovery song, it's A Change Is Gonna Come by Sam Cooke. I think it evokes a lot of emotion and passion and pain, which I definitely related to early on in recovery. But it's also a song about change and hope. And I think those are things that really resonated with me throughout. And actually, when you had asked me about this, I listened to it on the way to work today and kind of brought me back to those early stages of recovery.
Awesome. All right, so that's A Change Is Going to Come from Sam Cooke. All right, we're going to get it added to the list. So thanks for sharing that, Zach. All right, so Zach, let's dive into your story first for the audience. Your abstinence date from gambling.
So it's November 3rd, 2021. It's been 3 years and 3 days.
Congratulations, just past the 3-year mark. How's that feel?
Thank you. It feels a little unbelievable that much time has passed, and I'm just very grateful.
Yeah, and we're going to get into Zach's story, and he and I have a very similar timeline. We're excited to kind of share his journey and story, and kind of how we ended up meeting in the recovery rooms, which is a pretty cool story as well. So let's dive into sort of your background, Zach. If you could tell the audience a little bit about family life growing up. What was all that like? And then we'll get into the part about where gambling starts to become problematic in your life.
Yeah, so I born in the high desert in California. My parents were got divorced when I was 5. At the time, it was just me and my brother, and then my mom, and my stepdad, not too long after, got married and gave birth to my sister. And so a lot of my childhood was split between where my mom ended up moving to is Orange County and the high desert. So it was a lot of driving back and forth between the high desert in Orange County.
When you were kind of going through that process with your parents divorcing, and then you had a remarriage, and now you have another sibling from a different marriage. So between your brother and your sister, what was sort of that relationship as the three of you were now growing up together?
Well, I think inevitably the way that my parents separation worked, I saw both parents roughly 50-50, maybe 55-45. So it really did involve a lot of driving back and forth. And those car rides were my brother, my dad, and I. So inevitably through those car rides, we got very close. I'm 6 years older than my sister. And so I've always been close with her. I think as adults, I've reformed a new connection. Growing up, I was always the big brother and there for big brother roles. But it wasn't until I was off in college that we developed more of a friendship and adult connection, and I'm still very, very close to both siblings.
And I've been pleasured to meet both of them, and I know how close all of you are. So that is an awesome part of your journey as well. So as you start going through, let's say, school, um, what was that like for you as you get into maybe your teenage years? Was there anything that started to become problematic in your life in terms of emotions or anything that you had difficulty dealing with?
No, for me, I think school always came like fairly easy to me. And I think as the big brother, I kind of took that role to heart. And I think I probably put a lot of pressure on myself to perform well. Uh, and I internalized a lot. And I think I always wanted to be someone that people didn't have to worry about. And I think that relates later to when we get to my gambling of uh, not being able to reach out for help because I was always someone that valued that I was the rock. I was the older brother that was there to help my siblings. I'm not one that needed that help myself. And so school was fine. I think it was a little chaotic and just the driving back and forth. We would drive 70 miles back and forth from houses. Sports practice would end. School would end at 3 or 4. Sports practice would end at 7. We'd drive 70 miles to my dad's, wake up at 3:30 in the morning, meet halfway with my mom, and then be shuttled to school. And so the kind of chaos of that lifestyle was something that I actually grew comfortable with.
Got it. And then as you're going through maybe middle school and high school, what was life like there? Was it sports with your buddies? Like what was the typical life for Zach?
Yeah, I think until I was about 16 or 17 years old, sports were my life until my last wrestling match, which was my last sporting event in my senior year of high school. I think up until about 14, I thought I was going to be a professional baseball player. I was on travel baseball teams. I've always just been an ultra competitive person,
Mhm.
and my identity was an athlete. At school, everything else came secondary. Like I was so focused on sports, and I think probably in high school when sports ended, there was a sort of identity crisis of like, who
Mhm.
am I outside of these teams, these sports that like I might do well in, and yet now those are just part of my past.
All right, I have a question because I think this is the first time I even heard that. Wrestling. Um, how do you get into that? That is not the typical sport that the Southern California kid is going through.
Yeah, so I grew up playing baseball, football. My brother had a pretty set of severe concussions, and after his last one, it kind of freaked me out, and so I quit football after my sophomore year of high school.
Okay.
And then my brother started wrestling when he was in middle school, and I went and traveled to his tournaments and watched him go. And one of the coaches of his travel or club team was also going to help coach at the high school I was going to. And so after football practice one day, one of the football coaches asked if the wrestling guys wanted to roll around with the wrestling team, and we did. And I went to the practice and never looked back. And I think in a lot of ways, it was like the most formative experience of my life, just because the kind of discipline and things I would put my body through to like make weight. Um,
Mm.
I was able to endure a lot, and I saw it as a virtue. Where maybe in some ways it is a virtue, but I think it might have also led to enduring pain in other ways, emotional or not, in a way that
Mm.
because I saw myself as this tough person that could just grit it out. And so I think it is a foreshadowing, probably experience to uh, the amount I went through gambling without reaching out for help.
Yeah, I think that's a really great perspective because I think we all, as we get into gambling addiction and we somehow continue to wake up the next day and the insanity of doing it all over again and again and again, and it goes on for whatever duration of time each of us experience it, I think we become warriors. That's a really tough thing to go through in our lives, right? So it's an interesting perspective to correlate it back to your days in wrestling. That's really really insightful. Okay, so now was there any kind of so gambling you haven't talked about yet at all entering your life? What about other kinds of, I'll say, mm, deviant kind of behavior? Not deviant. That's not
Yeah.
the word
To
actually.
be
Whether
clear,
it's
yeah.
alcohol, drug, anything, any escapism, if you will, other than just living your life.
So
Did
to
that
be
go?
clear, gambling did enter my life at a pretty young age,
Okay, let's
but
talk about that.
if you want to top there first, and then I could
Yeah.
talk about the deviant stuff too. Um,
Cool.
so yeah, I'm trying to think of my earliest memory gambling. I was trying to think of it today, but I have a few of them, and so one is as early as I can remember, I would play poker with my family, like maybe 6, 7, 8 years old. Like when we got my family loves games,
Mhm.
and so we'd play all types of board games, and eventually it just became poker. And so I thought of poker just kind of like a board game, just
Mhm.
another game that I play with my family. And so that was probably 7 or 8. Uh, by the time I'm like 11 years old, every Sunday, my dad and his friends would get together and watch football. And my brother and I, all the kids, would be playing video games or in the pool. But the men would play poker, and there'd be a poker game. There'd be a $20 buy-in, and they had chips and a table. And I think when I was about 11 years old, when like my dad was like, you've played enough, like you can hold your own here. And so I played, and I did well. And I think I won like, I don't know, $20 or whatever. So I doubled up. Felt great. And like I said, I was an athlete. I was competitive. So I was like, oh, this is something I'm good at. And so uh, just moving forward at these, I felt really empowered to be sitting at the adult table, beating them, it's real money, so I don't think any of them were letting me, but at least at the time, I didn't think. Who knows? It could have been. It's only like $10 to make a kid feel good, so maybe they were. Um, but I was like, oh, this built up my ego. But I also remember my first big loss, and I was like such a sore loser, really sore loser. I cried, was yelling at my dad. It wasn't fair. And
Do you remember what
I
the big
remember,
loss was?
I don't remember what it was, but I remember what he did afterwards. He
Okay.
gave me another $20. He said, you can buy back in. And it was almost like this like aha moment. It was like, oh, I just lost that hand. I didn't lose. Right. And so it was kind of this early lesson of I just lost so far, right? Like there's always this new hope of a victory to come in the future. And I'm smarter than them and I could figure this out. Even at that age, I had that kind of ego. And so that led to me, I ended up getting like an online poker account with fake money, but I would play for like hours. I would watch poker
Mhm.
on TV. I watched all the World Series of poker, and it was on ESPN. I was a huge sports fan, so it just felt like at that time, not only is a game, it's a sport. It's like
Yeah.
the same analysts covering the sports I love are covering poker,
Right.
and so those Sundays were definitely like a big part of it. And there was also a pick pool. And I think when I was in high school, I formally joined that where you $20 and every week you're picking games. And um it felt like something fun I was doing with my dad and his friends. It felt just like I felt more closer to them, and felt like I was being treated like an adult. And so like as like a younger kid, it just felt good to be a part of this adult thing.
Yeah.
And so that I think those are sort of my like early experiences with gambling, and for the most
Mhm.
part, they were positive, which is I think uh, pretty in line with how most people like their first the honeymoon phase of gambling.
Right. Right. Man, when you were telling that poker story, it reminded me because I think for me, that was my earliest memory too. My parents always played in like a weekly card game with a group of 8 or 10 friends. They would just every Friday or Saturday night, and they would just rotate houses where. And I remember we were at our house, and I would just so badly wanted to play. I just wanted to sit in and play because I just was watching all the time. And they finally let me in. And I don't remember specifics, but I remember it was a couple dollars, I think, or whatever after the all the bets were made. And I thought I was going to win the hand, and I ended up getting beat. And I remember just throwing the cards, throwing my money, walking into my room, having a temper tantrum, crying my eyes out. And so that's really funny that because it really brought me back. I think that being my very first recollection of when I really gambled. So, man, funny how these stories sometimes resonate so closely. All right, so gambling had entered your life, and doing it fun, casually. You're connecting it to the family experience. I think these are very common stories from talk to a lot of compulsive gamblers. So now you get into college, yeah?
Yeah, and I think probably before college, I would say another important inflection point was when I turned 18, and I knew I was going to do this when I turned 18. I went to my first Indian casino, and it wasn't like a coincidence. It was I was waiting to turn 18 so I could go to an Indian casino with my dad and my family. And I went with my dad, my aunt, I think my grandma. It was a family affair, like, and got to get
What
the full casino experience.
was it, the family affair specifically to celebrate your 18th birthday? That's what you wanted?
That was just something my family did. They would go to the Indian casino and every so often it wasn't every trip down to San Diego. They lived in San Diego. It wasn't every
Mm-hmm.
trip down there, but it was something that when I was because I was 18, I was like, all right, let's take Zach. So it was my cousins, my aunts, uncles, dad, grandma. I think my like grandma, like she like won like a penny slot
Mm-hmm.
jackpot that night, and I thought it was so cool. But at the time, I was still exclusively playing card games because I thought roulette and slots were just dumb, and I was very judgmental about them. And
Right,
we all, yeah.
right. So do you remember what happened that 18th birthday trip to the casino?
I don't. I think there's probably so many Indian casino visits throughout my like 18 to 29 or whatever that they all kind of just blend, except for my other one where jumping farther ahead of
Mhm.
when I won like my first jackpot.
Yeah.
But all the other ones sort of just blend. I just remember them as like a fan. It's like it still was that honeymoon phase of like it was like this positive thing. In college, I think that was the time where there I think that's where I sorted to if I was a roller coaster and those big ones that slowly crank up, and then if you're at the front and you could just see the edge as you're going over, that was like this Vegas trip in college where I had only been to Vegas once before. It was with my mom and my on my 21st birthday, and that birthday I got a drink with my mom when I turned 21, and then I went to the poker room and played poker for 8 hours. Didn't see her again. Um,
Wow, that's
but
ballsy. 21, first time in Vegas, and you went into a poker room?
yeah, yeah, and at that point, all I had really done was just card games, and then um, in college, as I alluded to before, I did a trip to an Indian casino with my dad, and um, I decided to do a slot because my dad did slots. He told me about all this money he had won,
Mhm.
and he had gave me like $100 to just spend because I didn't have any money. And I put it in. I went to a dollar machine, and the first one I won, and I got enough winnings that they had to give me tax forms and everything, and
Right,
I was really nervous. I was like, I just had never won this much money
right,
gambling.
right.
I'd only gambled before for fun and entertainment, and never actually win money that could make a sort of difference in like what I'm gonna do. And
Wow.
so I walked over to him. I gave him his $100 back and said I have to leave. And this was like 15 minutes at the casino. And I have to go. And I used that
Wow.
money to like, my brother was studying abroad at the time, and I used it to pay for this whole trip to go visit him, pay for this trip to go visit friends, and um, so we had, like basically, it was like another one of those bad lessons of like, number one, I had, at least had the willpower to leave, which eventually
Mm-hmm.
that would go away. But
Right.
also gambling, it taught me this lesson of like, oh, I could. You wanted to visit your brother in New Zealand, you couldn't afford it. I can do that for you. And so
Right.
I was still, but I think it started to create that dream world of like those kind of things are possible if I just keep betting more than I can really afford to lose. And if I didn't have $100 to spend and I was doing $1 slot, that was already money I didn't have to lose every time I spun the wheel.
Got it. All right. So you cash it out, you do responsible things with the money, and then what happens from there? Is there a gap of time before you remember your next visit to a casino?
Yeah, I think my next visit was a Vegas visit, and this was like the one that like probably all the red flags were there of like this is something that's going to be dangerous. And because I went with friends, so this time I knew I liked slots. I went with friends, and we had a hotel room together. We all split. It was like four people in one hotel room, um, and they ended up all going to bed around like 2, and they asked if I wanted to join them. And I at the time I was up a little bit, hadn't really lost much, but then I said no, go to bed because I was a little self-conscious about wanting to play slots in front of them. I thought they would judge me, and so
Mm,
I waited for them to go to bed, and they all went to bed, and I was there up on a slot machine until 8 a.m. the next day until one of them had to tap me on my shoulder, like, "What are you doing?"
wow.
And at that time, I had gone up and down to like basically zero my bank account like 3 times, and eventually like evened out to like not like flat, but I had completely lost track of time and had this trip that we'd been planning, and I think a couple of them went out afterwards, and I just isolated myself in
Mm,
front of the slot machine and just was completely uh in the moment with the slot in a way that I just had never been gambling before. I'd never
mhm.
been, it had turned into this isolating
Yeah.
experience that was new.
What's going on with your college stuff?
So
You're in there
that
and
part was, I think that was a year after I graduated college.
okay.
Um, so I was working. And so the money I was spending was, and I wasn't, I was barely breaking even on my rent and salary. So I wasn't really saving. And so I didn't have the money to lose. Um, the next step is I'm in law school, and uh, I still, I think I had bet on, like, done some Super Bowl betting and sports betting here and there, but it wasn't really my thing. And then I did another Vegas trip with friends, and this time I intentionally created an excuse. I don't remember the excuse was that I had to go to bed or had a headache or something like that around the same time, like 1 o'clock, where we had a big group of 10 people, hadn't seen them in a while. It was kind of like a little mini college reunion at that point. And I disappeared and went to neighboring casinos to do high limit slots alone. And this time was the first time that I'd ever broken out a credit card to get cash advance after I had lost. And that was also something that I think I thought I would never do. And so it was just like yet another invisible line that like I was willing to cross. But in my head, it didn't trigger anything that I should be worried about. It was like, oh, that's what people do in Vegas. They do dumb things. That's why they say what happens in Vegas. And I barely go to Vegas anyway. So if it happens every now and then, that's fine. Um, but I really should have stitched together that experience in the prior one where I was willing to ditch friends that I wanted to spend time with that I don't get to see that much. And I lose money that I don't have. And um, it's definitely like the snowball effect where the snowball is getting bigger and I'm just not aware of the pace.
Um, we hear often with gambling addiction, there's two main forms of the problem gambler, an action gambler who's largely chasing excitement, thrills, big betting, um, skill related games, and then there's the escape gambler, um, which is, as I've understood it, the gambler who is looking to numb themselves out from life stresses, can't quite cope with something going on, um, and just wants to kind of zone out, which is what a lot of slot machine players that I've talked to have felt like they've experienced. Did you understand at the time, as you were starting to lose control a little bit, what was actually happening to you, or why? Was there a particular, whether it was law school or other things that may be going on in your life with relationships, et cetera, that you could identify, even whether it was then or even looking back now in recovery, where you have some clarity about what was happening back then?
I think, as I said before, I grew up as the older brother. I grew up as someone that did well in school. I grew up as someone that, did well in the sport. I think I probably put a lot of my pressure on myself to just do the right thing. And so I think it felt really good to just lose self-control and
Mm,
and totally let go. And I've done drugs, but they don't quite do that for me in the
mm,
same way, or at least I'm not like I'm not compelled to keep doing them and to feel that in that way. But something about it, the escape into the feeling, I loved the feeling, and it was it was a cocktail. It was Adderall. Pretty much every
mm,
Vegas experience, I took Adderall just so I could stay up and be
yeah.
um, focused. Nicotine, and then like the gambling rush, just that like moment of time between pressing the button, pulling the wheel, and seeing the results. Like that was the feeling I had when all those three things came together. I couldn't get enough of, and so I don't know if it was necessarily a particular thing I was escaping from, but I definitely wanted to escape into that.
Mm,
And um, it could have been all the other pressures, but at the time, like even that time when I was in Vegas, the most that experience, I was actually just at a really stable part of life. It was just um, there weren't too many external factors that I could have attributed that
mm.
experience to, other than just like being so compelled by that feeling and wanting to feel it again and again.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you talk about relating back to that um, persona of a life that you had all those years as the big brother and always wanting to do the right thing, almost like you wanted to escape into something that was risky, because
Yeah,
you were never able to do that in the life that you had and the way you experienced your childhood and all the things that went on within the family unit. Just a lot of stuff that not many kids necessarily have to go through, right? And so it was almost like you carried this burden for so many years, and now you found something to just let it all go and disappear into, and you didn't have to think about anything or anybody except the experience you were having.
I think that's a great way to put it.
Wow, that is really great perspectives, and yeah, it just it makes a lot of sense. Um, okay, so this experience now happens with the high limits. You're now going to places with credit cards that you've never gone before, and so now what happens after that experience that really starts to exacerbate it?
So that last experience, I think this is the last time I've been inside of a casino.
Mm.
physical casino. Um, and I just hadn't gone back to Vegas. I didn't have a reason to go to any casino. And so my third year of law school it was uh, started in 2019 and 2019, 2020. So of course the pandemic hit. And I had been dating someone from law school early in my first year. And so by the time our third year, we are still dating. And at that point, we've been dating for almost 3 years when the pandemic hit. And we were visiting her parents on a spring break trip when the stay at home shelter in place orders came in. And so what was going to be a 2 week trip uh, extended into like a 3.5 month stay with her parents, who I love. I really get along with. They were amazing. They lived in rural Georgia on a farm, and it was a beautiful place to live during COVID. And I'm forever grateful for that experience. I think, and I got really close to them, and it was just a very, very, I felt fortunate experience where a lot of people were, and I could have been in my 1 bedroom apartment in LA if it happened 2 weeks sooner. Um, that being said, I'm living with my would be in-laws for that long. And I think again, there's like a pressure to be on my best behavior, and maybe it's self-imposed. Um, and so I actually came back 1 week sooner than my then girlfriend, and who she had broke her ankle, and so she was staying home to rest up. So I came home with our cat, and I think I was feeling repressed, and I wanted to like get out and do something. And it would have been rock climbing, which if the gyms were open, that's what I wanted to do so bad. Um, but it wasn't. Nothing was open. My friends couldn't hang out. And I went to the grocery store, and on the way out of the grocery store, they have those scratcher machines. I'd bought scratchers in my life before, but I don't know, a few here and there. But I bought one, or bought a few, or something like 2 or 3 maybe. Took them home, scratched them, didn't win, but I got the rush again, and I was like, wow, that is what I want to feel. And so immediately drove back. At this point, I was at my apartment in LA. It was just me and the cat. I went to a 7-Eleven and bought like $150 worth of scratchers, and then I didn't even make it home. I did them all in the car, and just was covered in that scratcher dust.
Mm.
And just like, I think I definitely lost money on them, but then I bought more, and then I brought that stack home.
Were they
And
$1? So it was literally 150 different tickets.
no, it was a range.
Okay,
It was like some fives, some
got
tens,
it.
some ones. It was
Okay,
but it was a huge stack.
got
And
it.
like I couldn't even wait to go home for that first stack, and I went and bought and doubled up. And it
Mm.
wasn't even about the money. It was I was feeling repressed, and I just felt like it was a release. Um, and so then I got home, and I was like, these aren't cutting it. You can't even win that much. I'm like, what else can I do? And I remembered I had bet on the Super Bowl on this site called Bovada.
Hmm.
And so I went on Bovada, and I saw that they had just a full casino, and I had all these credits. And
Mm.
so I ended up taking Adderall and played slots online for the first time. Won a significant amount of money to me, and it was up to like 4 or 5 a.m. And Anne wasn't going to be back. Um, Anne wasn't going to be back for a week, and so I knew I wouldn't have to answer about it. I could just do this and keep playing these slots without questions. And so the next week, that's what I did. And I knew I would have to start studying for the bar exam the following week. And I thought, I've earned this. I just graduated law school. This is the pandemic. I deserve this, right? Right.
Hmm.
That
Hmm.
self-righteousness,
Ego,
ego,
arrogance
ego.
creeping in. Yep.
Yep. And so when bar study started, I was having fun with these slots. And I found out there's other sites that I could get free credits on. So I started those ones. And I think I might have created a casino account at every possible online casino that would offer me free credits.
About
And
how many of them were there?
close to
Ballpark.
100, close to 100,
Really? Holy
close to
shit.
100. Yeah, there was a website that like would list them all out and I would just go through them. And then I would, and when my then girlfriend was asking me, well, you're just gambling all the time? No, no, it's not real money. And at the time,
It was true.
it was true. It was not real money until I had spent all the fake credits. And then
Mhm.
it was okay, well, I'll deposit $50. And then we know how that story goes. And it just
Yep.
incrementally gets more. And when she continues to ask, is this still fake money? Yeah, it is.
Mhm.
And once again, the snowball effect, where this became a daily thing, became a daily thing, so for the bar study happened because of the COVID. The bar was delayed a couple times, so typically you have a 10-week period of study.
Mhm.
In this case, it was like almost 3 to 4 months, and so 3 to 4 months of just in the background. After I do 8 hours of studying, I would play these slots, and uh, it hit a breaking point where I had all those invisible lines before that like I had created and I crossed. Well, I was willing to cross them again, drained
Mhm.
my bank account. I had a stipend from the firm I was going to work for, spent that, uh, credit cards, maxed them all out, and then rent was due. And
Mhm.
instead of coming clean about why I didn't have money to pay rent, I said, the bar it was delayed and I wasn't expecting that. So the stipend, it was only supposed to cover the 10-week period. Now it has to cover this 4-month period. I don't have any money. And so I asked my partner to lend me money for rent. And of course, like any person would, who would have no reason to distrust me, said, sure, of course. And so she did. And then I was able to pay her back with stuff that I won. And
Yeah, I have a
no
question
question.
for you
Yeah.
on that because she had already been asking you about gambling and is it real money? So when you asked for that loan, did
Mhm.
she raise an eyebrow? Did she
No,
insinuate or not at all? She just
not at all. No red
went blind
flags.
faith. Okay, got it.
No red flags. And then I knew I couldn't and then once again the next month I was out of money and I couldn't ask her. So I had to ask the same question to my dad, who
Mm,
I knew would trust me and I could make up the same kind of story of why I needed it. And he sent me the money. And I one more time that happened and my options getting limited. I couldn't go back to her, couldn't go back to my dad. So then I reached out to like my best friend who I had lent money for the prior year. And um, when he was on his bar trip, so I was like, oh, he'll do this back to me. And so that's what happened. And finally, it hit a breaking point where I knew I couldn't just ask a second time to any of my people. That that was the point where I knew I had to ask Anne for money again, but also in the process of doing so, I had to I and just taking another step back this whole time, which sounds crazy, is I was planning an engagement. Um, she had a family ring that was with her parents in Georgia. I didn't know how I was going to get it to us, but turned out her brother was going to visit her parents and bring back that ring. And I know she's always wanted to use this ring. And then I was planning to combine it with my family ring for the engagement. And so it was like this whole secret operation of getting the ring from Georgia and getting it to us. And her brother was really strict about the COVID policy. So like even figuring out how I was going to see him in person and make a reason that I would need to see him in person was tough. But it happened. And so when it came time to tell her about the gambling, I needed to come clean and be like, hey, I'm not going to propose yet. but I needed to tell her I'm planning this, and your parents and your brother know. They don't know about the gambling, obviously, but like they know this engagement is going to happen. Um, and so that was my first rock bottom when I finally came to that day. We're at the apartment, and there's just like a split second of like, she gave me a smile, and it was just like such a beautiful, loving smile. And I'm like, I'm so afraid to tell her the truth right now because it's at this point, it's been months of little lies. And I'm like, this smile, those loving eyes I might never have the benefit of like that loving gaze ever again. And so like I remember taking it in, like this might be the last time I ever see her look at me in that way. And I told her, and it was just shock. She couldn't believe that I had, number one, lied to her about why borrowing money. Um, and two, just lied to her about the gambling over and over and over and over. It was heartbreaking for her and for me too, but for her. And just to have, she trusted me so much. And like, there was so much goodwill I built up, and I had just broken it. And, um, it at that point, I didn't know if we were gonna break up or what. It was, I was scared. I was desperate. I didn't really know what to do other than just at that point, just tell her, please give me a chance. Please let me try to prove to you all these things. But the one thing I didn't say I was willing to do was go to GA. I said, no, there's no way. I need to remain anonymous with my job. There's no way. I don't trust going into a circle of strangers, but I will see a therapist, addiction therapist.
Let's break right there. And then when we come back, we're going to continue with this really powerful story with Zach. We'll be back in the Gambling Recovery Lounge. Welcome back into the Gambling Recovery Lounge. All right, where we left off with a powerful story is all the lies now had come out to his girlfriend, what was going on, and now to the point of where the recovery hat has to come on. And Zach was saying that he was willing to go see a therapist, but not yet willing to go to GA. So Zach, talk to us about what that path was.
Yeah. So Anne was the one who said, I think you should get help. Have you considered GA? And I did call the hotline. I don't, it might have been 1-800-GAMBLER. I don't remember which it was, but I talked to someone that for about an hour about what had happened, and invited me to come get coffee with me, meet me in Orange County. I was living in Rancho Cucamonga at the time. Um, and I just did not feel comfortable going to do it in person. I was like, I am like, I think I'm different. I'm younger probably than this group of people. I could figure this out. Uh, this was just a symptom of COVID that I can get through. I'll go to an addiction therapist, but I wanted to do it my way, and everything too. I begged Anne not to tell her parents about my gambling, begged her not to tell my dad, not to tell anybody, which was the total wrong approach for me looking back. It caused a lot of stress because then she had internalized everything. She didn't have anybody to reach out to. And the only person she could talk to about it was the person that did it to her. And so that was really, really hard for her. And I definitely feel regret about the way I handled that. But I did eventually talk to my dad, and uh, he forgave me and just was worried about me, but otherwise, uh, forgave that I lied to him, which I was really worried about because I really treasure that relationship. Um, and I did go to therapy, and I picked up before my actual job started. I had like a 6 week period in between taking the bar and starting my like full time job, and so I picked up a side job and made back a decent amount of money. Started to pay off, repay Anne from borrowing her that second time, and the second time when I had to borrow from her, that time we signed a promissory note. We did it officially, and I paid her back my dad, and was going to therapy, and at the time was being honest with my therapist. And After that, I had moved in to a house with Anne and then my sister and my sister's boyfriend in Orange County, and started my full-time job. Everything was remote because everything was so COVID, so everything's remote. And for the first time, I was making significant amount of money for me. I'd always, I think, I was never, I never had a savings account. I I felt very comfortable losing all my money, I think, because I never had any money. So going to zero, it wasn't this, it wasn't something that shocked me, and maybe how it might shock someone else or might shock me like today if that happened. But at the time, um, so it was a really significant moment where I have some debt to pay back, but I'm also accumulating income at an increasing rate that my debt's going to go away. And so now, after a few months of working, I would have enough. I had paid all back all my debts, but then have all the savings, which I'd never had before, which to a compulsive gambler is a dangerous thing. And another significant thing happened to me just about a month into work was I was scrolling Reddit and found, like a lot of others at the time, like a stock tip of this really hot meme stock, and I was in early, and I watched my investment grow and grow and grow and grow, and I didn't view it as gambling. I rationalized it. I talked about it with my therapist. I was honest about money I put into it at the time. I was honest with Anne about the money I put into it. Neither of them were supportive. They both said it was gambling, and I was like, no. I'm like, I did diligence on this, looking at Reddit, but I did diligence on this decision. Um, but it what really was, and
Mhm.
the same habits of playing slots and watching, waiting for that moment in time. I get that same thing by looking at Robinhood app, and
Right.
it's just a different form. For me, it just triggered all the same juices, and because I was right and lucky once, I thought I could replicate it, and then the individual when I had the money I'd made, and when that with that one stock, it was all in shares.
Hmm.
But the problem with shares is that you're limited in the returns. There's not exponential returns like there are in options, which I learned about, and particularly short term options, which basically turn the stock market if it into a casino, and where a
Hmm.
small you read stories about small sums growing into these exponential amounts that could, for me, be life changing money and pay off student loans. And it all feeds into that dream world where, oh, if I make the right pick at the right time with the right investment, quote unquote investment, I can pay off all my student loans, be free of debt, like all these things. And like I would talk to Anne about these, and
Hmm.
she would look at me like I'm insane,
Hmm.
as she should, given that
Because you were, yes.
yeah, right. And I would just find ways of like rationalizing all these things, and eventually I started lying about it. I didn't talk about how I was doing options, and and inevitably, what happened was I wasn't in debt at the time. I had now saved up a decent amount, but the options just weren't cutting it, and it's so funny how looking back, because to my therapist, I said I don't have any compulsion to gamble,
Hmm.
right? Even though I was gambling on the stock market, but I said I had no compulsion to gamble. And what I meant by it at the time was I had no compulsion to do slots. And yet it was just like one very mundane afternoon where I was outside alone on my laptop. And because I was comfortable again financially,
Hmm.
and the financial problems weren't as magnified at the time, I was like, what? how much is it going to hurt just putting in X amount of dollars? Like it's that I'm only I spend more of this on a DoorDash order, right? Like it's fine.
Mhm.
And that turned into, okay, well, how about a little bit more? And then the next day I was like, well, that was fun. And I just, my stocks are increasing, so I can pull some from there. And eventually it led to every single dollar I had gained in the stock market, which was enough to have paid off my original debt.
Mhm.
I had put into the slots again and some. And at this time, Anne and I were engaged and we were planning a wedding. We had hired a wedding planner. We had plans of moving uh, to a different city, and she had gotten a new job in that city and uh, in Seattle, and really was relying on this path of our move to Seattle. I had talked to my work about working from there, worked it out, and everything was in motion. And as all these things started to get in motion, that is when I re-entered the slots, and I was lying to Anne. I was not
Mhm.
talking about it with my dad, with my brother at the time, with my sister at the time,
And the therapist you're
and
lying to
my
was
therapist. And I would literally be on the slot machine right moments before the session, and then would turn it off, and then enter the session. And
right. Yeah.
yeah,
Totally relate. I did the exact same thing with a therapist. I had some months of abstinence, and then I re-enter my sports gambling addiction, and I'm lying. I'm on the phone with her and I'm telling her I'm good, and I am literally watching games and betting at the same time. So I lived your story exactly. Now, when you proposed to Anne, how much time did she believe you had in terms of abstinence, even though you kind
well,
of
when I proposed, I was
you were
abstinent,
abstinent?
but
Okay,
but
so how much of that time
it
were
was
you?
only about a month after that initial talk when I came clean.
Okay.
And about a month after that, I I I I I I told her parents and her brother, and they were a different city. It wasn't in person because of COVID, but I
Hmm.
FaceTimed them, and they all forgave me. Her brother, but they all have science backgrounds, so like they thought about the addiction in this like really like this medical scientific way, and like we're just all very understanding and
Hmm.
non-judgmental. And I thought I was going to be judged, and I frankly thought I deserved to be judged, and I didn't feel that. And it and so gaining back their trust and their love and their acceptance, like this second time, it was so much different because even though there was a lot on the line the first time it's like, you know, it's we weren't engaged. Nobody knew about it. I hadn't made all these promises about I'm taking this seriously. You should trust in me. I'm trying to get better. The second time we had this big life move. We were engaged. We were planning a wedding. Her parents had forgiven me. Her brother, who she's very close with, had forgiven me.
Hmm.
And so I was gambling way more money the second time, but that's not even the thing that made it just a psychosis. It was the emotional stakes and like the real life stakes of like I was putting all of this on the metaphorical table
Yeah.
for my addiction. And it was, and I just internalized it. That maybe that wrestling grit, maybe that, big brother grit, like all of that, like rather than just come, hey, I screwed up and I played a slot again, and I don't want to get this is dangerous. I didn't have that. I just had lie about it, save face. I was afraid of losing everything that I had, and that fear drove me to just continue to lie and
Hmm.
continue to lie. And it was more Adderall. I worked longer hours. I had lost like 15 pounds, and not for me my size, like it's a lot.
Right.
I would go like the whole day without eating, just forgetting about it because I was under so much internal stress. Uh, our relationship was deteriorating. There was so much tension and fighting because I was just becoming this broken, tormented person and
Mhm.
lashing out and not being, there was not a part of me that was trying to be like a good partner in that time. I was in survival mode for my
Yeah.
addiction. I wanted to sustain this addiction, sustain the facade of a normal life, of a normal person at all costs. And not once did it occur to me I should get real help. I just, as long as other people weren't, as long as like this plan of quote unquote of my future was going to remain intact, I had to keep going, and even involving people in my life to kind of keep up this conspiracy. Like I eventually
Right.
reached a point where I needed money, and I borrowed money from my dad, borrowed money from my brother, and begged them, you can't say anything. You
Mhm.
cannot say anything to her. Like please, I will stop, but please, just, you can't say anything. And that was such a terrible position to put people I love in. Like, who, this is like going to be their sister, and this is going to be his daughter-in-law.
Yeah.
Like, these are family, and I'm asking them to sacrifice their relationships for like this false hope of like maintaining mine in this current state.
So let me ask you a couple of things, Zach. First of all, I want to say that I think every compulsive gambler who's listening to this knows exactly the kind of story you're talking about, the incredible amount of pain and the lying we start to do, and then we're covering our tracks with more lies. And our lives, in many ways, are very good, and yet we are willing to put it all on the line for the one thing that's killing us, and that's the devastation of the disease. But what I wanted to ask you actually is, so you're at this point, 28 when all this is happening, 28 years old, about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Was there a part of you that even understood that you were in this severe, debilitating addiction that was absolutely taking control of your life? Did 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 you even understand what was happening, or was it just, I just have to somehow keep going and keep this up because I don't have any idea how to actually stop? Like, what do you remember how it felt for you back then?
I don't think I ever had that realization until going to a GA room and hearing other people share the same story. I thought I was just continuing to make bad decisions. And I just felt it was such a personal failure on my part to just not be able to like do the right thing. And like, and it made me quite like, am I just this terrible human being? Like, all along I thought I was a good person. I thought I was capable of good. I thought I was like, and it just messed with my whole image of myself. And um I don't think I would say the words gambling is an addiction. Gambling, it changes your brain chemistry, but it didn't. I didn't. I don't think I believed it. I just I don't think I really understood the gravity of it at all.
Do you think there was any part of it, being 28, not wanting to say this? I have to say I'm an addict, and I have, God willing, so many years of my life yet. Can this possibly be who I am at 28 years old? This is where I've gone.
Yeah, I think there's probably something to that where it's such a permanent thing to put that label on. And my mom's dad was an alcoholic, and like
Mm.
that's one of the first things I think about when I think of him, as just like, oh, I know he was an alcoholic. He went to these meetings growing up, and like I kind of judged that.
Mm.
And maybe that what we talked about earlier about that, like putting myself on some sort of pedestal to live up to, where I'm that person. I'm not the addict. That I'm not the addict. That's not me. I'm not someone that like people should worry about. That's concerning. Um, and just being afraid of just embracing like, oh no, I'm like I have real faults, and I and there's and not realizing at that time, that age, whatever it was, that like I have to take this deadly serious, and not be ashamed of what who I am and what I am, in order to like have any sort of normal life.
Got it. And when you talked, I know we're going to get into recovery here soon and your GA journey. When you talked though originally about the therapist suggesting GA, and you were like, "No, I'm not doing that," and I was the exact same way. Um, I was 49 at the time. You were 28. Was it for you that assumption that you're just going to be totally unrelatable to the people in GA because whatever you had heard or assumed by what you saw with other 12-step programs or whatever, that people will be way older than you and not be able to relate to you, and or was it something else that other than that that made you say from the beginning, I'm not willing to do that?
I think it was probably a combination of judging, having preconceived notions of what an addict is, and then being able to say that doesn't apply to me, because those are all these I have all these negative connotations of what and who an addict is, and
Mm-hmm.
there's no way that's me, because I think of myself highly, and then also just fear of like we just talked about, the permanency of identifying as an addict and what that would mean, um, and seeing it as like a failure in some way.
Yep. Got it. Okay, so pick up your story now. So now everything's coming to a head again. Lying to the therapist, the money's being borrowed. So now what happens?
So I had, at this point, couple 2 or 3 months had gone by, and and it was essentially just I was it's really sad with the income I was making at the time, at that age, and living where I was living. I had pretty cheap rent. I should have been saving so much, and yet I was living paycheck to paycheck. And as soon as I got direct deposit, it would go into the casino or go off to pay the credit card that I needed to pay. So I wasn't, and I was, even though I was already becoming delinquent on these, and I'd asked my brother, my dad, for money enough that like I knew I couldn't go back to them. Um, they were asking me to tell Anne, and I said no, that's not what I'm going to do. Um, and so it finally came to a head when I knew for a fact that I had nowhere else to go. Like there wasn't a single source of money. I'm not gonna. I wasn't willing to like steal. I wasn't willing to like rob a bank. There were certain lines that at the time. Who knows in the future, if I would ever. I think every invisible line is just another thing that I might cross someday. But at the time, there were certain lines I wouldn't cross, and I finally hit my line that I wouldn't cross, and I knew nobody could help bail me out. And so I came to a certainty out of desperation that I knew I needed to tell Anne. And it was at this point 1 week before we were moving to Seattle. All of our stuff was in storage. All of our plans, we knew we were living, we had work situation, everything, our whole life. This was a huge move. Um, I've lived in California my whole life, and I'm like planning to uproot it and everything. And she's grew up in Georgia, now in California, planning to uproot and move it and live near my family. Like it was a huge decision that we've been building up with my family up there. They're all excited to have us up in Seattle. My dad and my brother up there at that time, and uh, I needed, and so in that same way of like that image of in the apartment of like this, number one, I felt that again. I felt if I tell her now, for sure, she's never gonna look at me the same way. But then two, all my family that's expecting me to move up to Seattle. I had my brother, my dad, cousins, all these people that are so excited for both of us to have this life up there that as soon as I say these words, all of that's going to evaporate. And the truth was, even if I didn't say those words then and I kept the lie up for a few more weeks, moved to Seattle, it would have blown up in pieces there too. But in the time, I felt like, like this is, I am, but for me saying these words in this moment, these things are still at least a possibility. And so like I was so afraid and finally, but I had to. Um, and so I told her I had lied again. I've been gambling again. The debts were worse. Um, and it was just the most pain and shock I have ever seen. And she just told me to get out, just get out. And she started packing her bags. I left. I didn't know where she'd be back when I got back, and I drove my car. And this time I had no money. I had barely a quarter tank of gas. I knew there was a GA meeting that was about 10 minutes from my house, and it was another inflection point in my life where I could have drove anywhere. I don't know. I could have drove to the beach, just look at the ocean. I could have drove to, like, I was thinking like Mexico. I was like, no, I don't really have enough money and I don't have my passport. I don't want to go home to my passport. Like, I don't know. I just thought of all the scenarios. And I was like, you know what? I know this J meeting. I think it's the right thing to do. And I think it kind of looks like the right thing to do. And in this moment, I kind of need to do what I think is the right, like, it wasn't like an altruistic, like, oh my gosh, this is good for me. It was saving face again and not really knowing where to go and not really having a choice because I didn't really have any money to do anything. So I went to my first GA meeting. And that night, within 20 minutes of having that conversation, like I was walking in the door of that GA meeting. So it was like a very, very heavy emotional state for like that first meeting.
And that was November 3rd, 2021.
Yeah.
Ooh. Yep. I can relate to a lot of that pain, what you did to her, the pain you described in her eyes and her voice. I went through the exact same thing with Edgardo, and it's etched in my mind forever. Sounds like when you went into that first meeting 20 minutes later, fair to say you were at the low desperation point of your life at that moment.
Yeah, I at that point I don't even know if it was desperate. It was the most hopeless I've ever felt.
Yeah.
I think the desperation had kind of fled because I knew there was no escaping the moment I was in. It was just I had no idea. I had worked so hard to get where I was in our relationship and school to get to the job I had to go to the law school, and yet I felt like I was in such a how am I reaching rock bottom now, right? Like this should be like peak life.
Right.
This is like all the stuff I've worked to achieve, and yet I have less than nothing, and I felt worthless inside and out, and I just felt so guilty about like the pain I caused and just I I'm like I wanted forgiveness, but I was like I don't deserve anything. And that was the part. It was like I wanted hope, but I was like I don't really think I deserve hope. I don't I think I deserve her to say I never want to see you again. Get out of my life. And 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 yet when I walked into that meeting, uh, um, I read the combo book, the whole comic book as we do in the first meeting. And I that was when I realized that I was in the right place. Like I was like, oh my, like I couldn't have imagined the impact of like reading that. Like just I'm like this person, whoever this is, whoever they are that wrote this, like they know what I'm going through. And the people I'm with, they must also know. And as they shared, I think I shared first. Um, and they all shared. I think because I shared my story, it brought out a lot of really deep shares about their first meetings, and I just think those 10 or 11 people that were in that meeting that night like saved my life because they they gave me hope when I would have thought it was impossible to have found any sort of hope and any sort of motivation to just like not just give up on it on life, right? Like I don't think I was suicidal, but I just I didn't know how I was just gonna just wake up and move the next day. I and being there, I saw how. I was like, that's why they went through this too, and here they are, and it's because they just kept coming to these meetings, and so um,
Do you remember? I assume you did the 20 questions your first meeting. Do you remember? Were you a 20 for 20?
no, I was a 17 for 20 my first meeting.
Ah,
Yeah, I
holding
am
back a
definitely
few yeses.
yeah, I reflecting, I'm definitely a 20 for 20. But I think I was holding back and rationalizing the first one.
For sure.
Um, yeah, it's funny to think about.
Yeah, I think I was at 18 for 20. Yeah, because there's a couple you're like, ah, I'm not that bad. I didn't
Yeah.
steal. Yeah, yeah, you did. Yeah, you did. Or whatever your no's were at the time. All right, so you go to that meeting. So then what starts to happen, with your relationship with Anne and family?
So she moved back to Georgia. I couch surfed. Our lease had ended just a couple weeks after that. Um, and so I started couch surfing. I stayed at home alone for a bit whenever my sister and her boyfriend ended up, they had a trip planned. So like that first week I was just alone with my sister's cat, my cat.
Mhm.
Anne was gone. She didn't tell me where she was at the time, but I later found out she was back. She was at her brother's place and then eventually in Georgia. Um, I didn't hear from her for like 10 days. And then that's when she told me because she turned off five of my friends. And so she had told me, hey, I'm in Georgia. I'm not ready to talk yet. Um, and So I was couch surfing with family for the first about 50 days or so, until like mid-January. And Anne and I eventually started texting and calling, and it was tough. There was a lot of, I think, obviously lots of resentment. She was processing everything.
Mhm.
And with distance, it's really hard. It's I would wake up to like long texts of like, how could you do this? And like, uh, just venting about like
Yeah,
the
disbelief,
thing,
anger,
the
all the.
disbelief, anger, like just, and I deserved all of it. And um, it was it was tough, but I think she also needed an outlet, and um, I don't know if it was the best for both of us, but it was. She needed to say her feelings and I needed to hear them. Like, and if we weren't going to see each other, I needed, even though it wasn't the most ideal circumstances, I needed to do my best to understand how she felt. I was never going to know. I didn't live her experience, but I could try to like get to the best of my understanding of the pain I put her through because that was what I owed her and I owed myself because I needed to learn. Like the people we harm with this disease is the biggest, for me, it's the number one reason why I continue to go to meetings and will always take my addiction seriously is I'm capable of really hurting the people I love the most. And I can't ever forget that. And so um we did distance. I ended up moving to Seattle for 4 months. She eventually moved back to LA. And so she decided to just worked out with her firm that she was going to stay in LA, and I stayed in LA. And eventually, I was working remotely until like midway through the year. And throughout that time, when I was in California, I was going to meetings, and then when I moved to Seattle, it was a pretty key point of my recovery was I no longer had in-person meetings because they had discontinued in-person meetings because of COVID. And so I needed to find I needed to find a place of recovery, and so I had to do Zoom.
Mhm.
And I tried my first Zoom room, and the first Zoom room I did, I didn't have my camera on.
Mhm.
I don't even think I shared. I just listened. Um, I was like on the ground, like I remember like doing something, like I was distracted, and I was like, I can't do this. And so my second one, I had my camera on, my name on, and that is the I think it was a Wednesday Burbank online Zoom meeting, and that's where I met you.
Yep, I still remember it. Um, all right, so now you're doing these Zoom meetings, and you're in Seattle, and Anne is back in California. So, are you? What happens now over the next few months? Because you obviously are going to come back here to California in the plan, right?
Yeah, so before she had moved back, we decided that we needed to see each other. And so I did spend a week in Georgia and visited her in February. And not only with her, but like I said, I lived with her parents for 4 months. I was really close and I really, really let them down. And I needed to see them and apologize and talk to them. Like if I wanted to rebuild this relationship and Anne was willing to give this another chance, uh, part of that is mending the relationship with her family. And so it was really, really hard to tell them in person in like sort of graphic detail everything I had done
Yeah.
and to see their disappointment in me and to have her dad, look me in the eyes and be like, I don't know if a relationship can recover from this. I like you. I think he's like, I don't think you're a bad person, but I just don't know if this is going to work. And he's like, I think he said, I don't know if I really support it, but it's also ultimately up to you guys. And if this is what she wants, I support her. And he's like, but you just have to prove it, right? Like your actions, not your words. You can't say anything that's going to change our minds. You just have to prove it. And I think as a gambler, every problem was something I wanted to solve today. Like, right? Like a spin of the wheel, lucky stock day, like all my problems are solved.
Mhm.
And I just realized like this is gonna be a long process. Like rebuilding trust with Anne, with her family. It's it's like I like the only way that is possible is to do what I've done, should have done all along. And it's that like I just need to take this seriously. Like I'm an addict. I'm a compulsive gambler and this isn't going away. And uh GA, while it at first presented itself as the only ticket back to like getting the life I had, it also eventually became like such a place of comfort and like this community of people that like understood this really difficult situation I was going through in a way that no one else would. And like having that community of support, of lack of judgment, understanding, so important because I was so hopeless. I was in so much pain. And like, I just needed people like you and others in this program to like show me a path and like encourage me. And like, that's what I got. I got, there's no, and I'm, probably jumping the gun here, but of course, I was going to ask you to be my sponsor. Is like, I see the relationship you have with Edgardo and the support and the communication you have about the addiction. And despite everything you had done, finding a way to make it work. I'm like, that is what I want so badly. I want to make this relationship work. I want to learn what you know, and I want to be in this together because, like, you're going to understand me and my situation more than you know, so many other people. And having the spouse, loved one affected in this way, it's tough because as you are recovering and getting this emotional support, getting this recovery, getting this guidance and feeling seen and heard by others, like your partner might not have that. And like I know Anne didn't. She felt really, as I was all feeling like the benefit of this beautiful community, she felt so alone.
Yeah.
And so the timeline of like my recovery versus hers and like her processing everything, it was staggered. And that is something that we've had to work through. And it required me to be patient because I didn't give credit to that. I was like and it was unfair of her to expect us to be on any sort of similar timeline, given that I had known about this for so long and finally reached a point where I needed help. Where she was just learning about it and then had to scramble and piece back together the last 2 years to
Right.
make sense of anything.
Yeah. Yeah. And look, I think you and I are two examples of people who have the rare person standing by their side once all the truth comes out and the pain is disclosed and the dishonesty and the manipulation and all the uh, and I think we see in these rooms all the time that far more people in our situation lose their loved one. Um, and that's not even always just a significant other. That could be parents, children, friends, etc. So I know we live a very similar blessed life because of that, and where our partners sit in that. And they're obviously, as you just said, they're all on their own journey because they were affected so deeply. And each of them in their process has to go through whatever they have to go through. And like us, they're on a lifetime journey as well, because we're going to be on our lifetime journey, right? God willing, as long as we continue to stay on the straight and narrow. So, where are you and Anne today? Now over just over 3 years in your recovery. What's going on with your relationship now?
Yeah, so I guess one part I didn't mention was when she left and packed her bags, she
Mm-hmm.
took off her and when I visited in February, she told me she was no longer wearing her ring, and to her, we were no longer engaged. And so we were disengaged for a period of time up until this past May. So that's like about a year and a half
Mm-hmm.
of being, we were separated but disengaged. We eventually, after a year living apart for just over a year, I guess November, I moved back in. No, it was about a year and a half. Um, moved back to, so I think maybe it was like 2.5 years of being disengaged. Wow. So yeah, it was a year and a half of living apart. Moved back in, and I re-proposed. We got re-engaged this May, and yeah, we're getting married and planning a wedding for next year.
Awesome. Just absolutely awesome. Um, so I want to ask you a few questions about recovery specifically, because of course, the number one thing that jumps off the page to me is you came in to this at 28 years old. And for a lot of young people out there going through addiction and entering recovery for the first time, or maybe the multiple time, there's a lot of young people who stay away from GA and who are very put off by the program and what it represents. You and I have both talked openly about how we too had those same initial feelings about GA, which is why we told our therapist we're not doing that, right? And then eventually we got to that place. So for you're now coming up on being 32 in a month, right? But at the time, being 28, going into 29, what's some of the words of support or wisdom that you can offer to the young people that are out there who don't think GA is an attractive place, a place where they can find recovery, based on your experience, strength, and hope that you've gone through? What are some of the things you'd want to tell that individual?
I'd want to say that for me, number one, and it's simple, I think it's a lot easier. Life is a lot easier. The problems are a lot easier to solve when you're not gambling. When I gambled, those are the most difficult problems I've ever had to solve in my life. And when I finally decided to stop, whether it's the the problem of not of having to quit my fantasy sports teams that I've been a member of for 15 years, or am I going to lose friends over this? Am I what if I can't go to Vegas anymore? All these things, like, those are such easier problems than the problems that create gambling. And I truly believe every person that ends up in a GA room, or person that is considering going to a GA room, probably there's a reason for it. Um, and there's a lot of people that have stories of coming back, of first going to their room maybe in their 20s or their teens, and then not accumulating time to their 40s. And
Mm-hmm.
time is such a valuable thing, and it's the most important thing that I lost really, really amazing years in my youth that, like, I'll never get back, but like what I can get back and what I can keep is all the time that's ahead of me. And I think thinking of it simply as, like, do I want an easier way of thinking and living, or do I want a more difficult way? And for me, it's like the easier path is just to be honest and uh, not think I have all the answers.
Yeah, great advice. So let me ask you this, now being 3 years into this, what would you say today, Zach, is your biggest challenge in recovery that you're still working through, that is on your radar of things that you want to continue to improve upon? There's multiple things, but I'm sure for all of us, there's multiple things. But is there one that sticks out for you that, something you really want to be working towards?
I think it'll be a continuing working process, but it's just how to balance all the obligations of life and recovery. And whether or not you're in a relationship, it could just be with your family, relationship with your friends, exercise, work, and then finding time for recovery and how to properly allocate all of that. I think, given my busy work schedule, there's ebbs and flows in the amount of time I'm able to allocate among those things, and family obligations, relationship obligations. And uh, I think, regardless of anything, there's never an excuse to just discard recovery from that piece, from the pie chart. It always deserves a slice, and a significant slice, because it's the foundation of everything else. Without taking recovery seriously, all those other things can go away. And so it's just finding that right balance and striving for the right balance. And I don't think I've found the perfect balance yet, but it's something I'm definitely continuing to, like, work towards.
Well, when you figure it out, let me know, because I think I suck at it. So it's a little twist on that question the other way. What would you say in this 3 years of recovery in GA? Is there something that pleasantly surprised you about what you've gotten from GA and your recovery that you didn't see coming at all, when you were on the initial journey that has really made a big difference in your life?
It's absolutely the community that, outside of my prior groups of friends and college friends, law school friends, high school friends, family, I have a community of people that genuinely I care about personally and know stories of them and their family, and I care about their journey and like a non-self-seeking way. And they return the same for me, that people that there's a group of people that love me and like that as much as like a lot of my family loves me,
Right.
and in the same way, and doesn't ask for anything in return. And I don't think I was ever expecting to have such a beautiful community of people in my life when I walked into a room trying to just stop gambling.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that sentiment. I mean, when we come in, I mean, I know I didn't think it would work at all. I didn't necessarily help me stop gambling. And then you realize after a little while, you start getting involved more. It's like, oh, this is actually about a lot more than just not gambling. Like it's a whole life transformation. I know we've been working on the 12 steps of recovery, which is obviously a cornerstone of the program. What do you think the process of actually working the steps has done for you in terms of making a difference in your trajectory of recovery?
I think all of it matters. I think going to meetings matters. I think being a sponsor, having a sponsor, it's all these pieces of the puzzle. And for the steps, and particularly for me, it's the chance to write. And I know there are probably a lot of people this way, that like writing is the way I could really articulate my thoughts. It's for me, the best way of articulating my thoughts, and taking the time to really dissect and be critical and honest about my behaviors and my flaws, and finding areas to grow. It's such a healing process that I think people that, in a way, people that aren't in a 12-step program, they're unlucky because they don't have the chance to like work through these steps and uh, continue to grow as human beings, rather than just being static in adulthood.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. All right, any closing thoughts you want to throw out there, Zach, of your journey, your experience, and coming into recovery, and now where you are today?
I, it's gratitude. Um, I think, speaking for myself, and it's probably true for others. When I was gambling, there was actually a lot in my life I should have been grateful for that I just didn't take the time to appreciate, and that until I had the chance of losing it, I didn't express gratitude for it. So I think today I'm just, of course, life isn't always perfect, but um, I'm so grateful to have the people in my life that are in my life, to be at the place I'm in my life, to not have to place a bet to feel good in life. And that all of it was possible because I decided to step into a GA room 3 years and 3 days ago.
Well, Zach, I think your story, your journey, how raw, vulnerable you were tonight, telling all and not holding back what this disease did to you. A seemingly normal upbringing, life was good, school was good, had friends, had good family, uh, went through college, law degree, and all of it came crumbling down because of the one thing that took over your life, and it took nearly everything away from you. But we all got here when we get here, and thank God at the age of 28, whatever the reasons are that all those things happened for you when they did, it got you to this place 3 years and 3 days ago. And I'm so grateful that we met on that Zoom meeting. I'm grateful you moved back to LA. I'm grateful for the morning we had that breakfast and the sponsorship discussion came up. And it's been an incredible journey. And I'm proud of you. I love you. So grateful that we get to now do this for God willing, as many years as that we're here. So thanks again, Zach, for coming on and telling your story. Um, for anyone who has a question that they want to ask me, or even a question that you have for Zach, because I know his story is really riveting and going to resonate, especially to a lot of the young people out there who struggle with this and aren't sure about how to go about recovery. You can send it to Eric at thegamblingrecoverylounge.com. And I will take your question. And if you have it for Zach, I'll relay it to him and make sure that we get back to you. So that is a wrap on experience number 12. Again, thank you, Zach, for coming in to the Gambling Recovery Lounge. And we will see you all back very soon in the Gambling Recovery Lounge. Have a great night.